Hello, welcome, good evening. This is Novara Live. I am Bastani, and tonight I'm joined by Helena, aka No Justice MTG. Helena, how are we?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. It's been a while since we've been on the show together. Looking forward to it, as always.
Yeah, I've been rather AWOL when it comes to Novara Lives recently. Even actually at our event last Monday, somebody came up to me and they said, "Have you and Michael Walker fallen out? Why don't I see you on Friday evenings anymore? What's going on?" All kinds of conspiracy theories were in circulation. Me and Michael have never been on better terms, and I'm looking forward to a great show tonight. Budget Day is, of course, looming tomorrow. We'll get patriotic millionaire Dale Vince's take on Rachel Reeves's second outing as Chancellor. Stick around to find out why right-wing slop is taking over your social media feed. And finally, an interview with Chris Bratt from People Make Games. That's concerning Rockstar's mass firing of workers attempting to unionize. Before we get started, we've got some very exciting new merch to announce. I have some tote bags here. This is a really good one. We had Stealth Wealth. Now try Stealth Hate. Hate landlords, shimmering, glistening in the studio lights. Yellow and black marks, very Batman original with Michael Keaton coded. And of course, we have another Novara one, black. I won't show you that. But marks in red and white. What else would we choose in terms of a colour scheme? They are produced sustainably by Bags of Ethics totes. And of course, as ever with our merch, this is a way to support our journalism here at Novara Media. They're fabulous bags in fabulous colours, and they're available from shop.novaramedia.com. The link to buy those wonderful totes and all our other merch is in the link in the description below. As ever, if you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you know what to do. Sign up at novaramedia.com/support. We're building a new media for a different politics. We started this because we were pulling our hair out at how bad legacy media was. Help us change it. Go to novaramedia.com/support. And as ever, this evening, I want to know what you think. Feedback, let me know. Give me your comments, either here on YouTube in the chat or over on X. Let's go to our first story tonight. A new scandal has erupted at the Department for Work and Pensions, one that has left hundreds of thousands of people facing mounting debt, distress, and even court cases. An independent review of how the government pays unpaid carers allowance has found that entrenched failures by Tory ministers and welfare officials has driven some of Britain's hardest working people to financial and psychological breaking point. To be clear, the people involved in what appears to be administrative persecution by the state are also amongst those who carry the heaviest burden in our society. I'm talking, of course, about carers and unpaid carers at that. We're talking spouses, parents, even children, mostly women, who've taken on the care of work or other of full-time care and saving the state tens of billions a year. A 2023 study found that unpaid carers in England and Wales contribute around £162 billion to the economy a year. That's a sum equal to the NHS budget for both nations. Suzanne Osborne is one of them. She's provided full-time care to 5 members of her family over the years. This is from an ITV report that aired last month.
Susan Osborne is always on the move. Over the years, she's provided full-time care to 5 different family members, and she's never earned a penny doing it. She still looks after her disabled daughter, brother-in-law, and husband, John.
I mean, with John at the moment, it's everything, because he can't move, so I'm cooking, cleaning. He can hardly move out the chair. I'm having to help him with his walking. I try and help him in the bath, but it's a nightmare at the moment. It's very, very stressful, and sometimes I'm so tired, you know, and then I get irritable, and then I get snappy. And I don't mean to be, you know, but sometimes it does get too much, you know, and it's really, really hard for carers.
What makes it even harder is the finances. Susan had to give up her job to care for her family, and the carer's allowance she gets comes with caveats.
So obviously £83 a week, it's not a lot of money. Now, it's taxable, so it's not a benefit. So the problem with that is that because John's on benefits, they take that off his benefits. They take half of it. So although they give me the 83, they take £40 off him. the politicians don't understand how we survive, really, because they don't have to.
There are currently 1.9 million unpaid carers working more than 35 hours per week in the UK and getting paid just £83 for that time. That's an increase of 70% since 2004, a product of growing demand for paid carers outstripping supply at an alarming rate. And of course, this is something more broadly reflective of an ageing population. But at the heart of this story is the complexity of a system that has neither logic nor compassion. Unpaid carers who look after loved ones for at least 35 hours a week are entitled to carers allowance, but only if their weekly income from part-time jobs isn't more than £196. Going over that limit, even by a single penny, means the entire allowance for that week must be repaid. So imagine you're a carer who's gone a penny over that limit every week for a year. It's not 52 pence you have to pay back to the DWP, it's over £4,300. And that was the case with Davina, who cares for her husband who suffers from Parkinson's disease. Interviewed by The Guardian last year.
January 2023, this letter arrived. You've been overpaid. You owe us £3,800 odd pound. So they'd allowed about 4 years to go by without letting me know. Every so often I'd gone over their limit, falling foul by £3 or £4. And it was a shock. I'm sorry. But it still hurts. I just don't understand. I'm sorry. You think I'm working these regular hours. I think I'm under the limit. And you're dealing with work. I'm dealing with Mike. It's almost like an accusation that I'm taking taxpayers' money. And I did it deliberately. And never was I deliberately doing it. It was an honest mistake, and I apologise. But to leave it for 4 years is so cruel.
What an awful way to treat somebody. I mean, you're working, you're caring for a partner or a husband or a wife or a child or a parent, in that lady's instance, a husband. And as she said, she's made to feel like a criminal for doing the right thing, for saving, this is really important, for saving the taxpayer money. Even if the carer has the money to make repayments, which they often don't, there are also fines on top of the repayment, with the DWP able to charge £50 per overpayment. And when a carer can't afford any of that, which many of course can't, it means court and further costs and penalties. By December last year, the total overpaying debt attributed to unpaid carers had reached £250 million. £250 million for the most hardworking people in our society, with most of those cases involving people earning extra money from part-time work. This scandal has been brewing in the DWP for years. Last year, Elizabeth Tate, who cared for her disabled son and terminally ill husband, appeared on GMB to tell her story.
So when did you realise that you'd done too much paid work, which was then affecting what the support you got for your unpaid work?
Well, I sort of realised when I got the letter through the post and I owed £1,623.
Which is a huge amount.
It is.
Some people might say, well, gosh, just pay it back. Yeah. But when you're living on £86 a week, you're never going to get that, are you? Yeah.
And the thing with carers' allowances, the system already knows that you're a carer because you can't claim it unless the person you are caring for is on certain disability benefits.
Right. So it's all there, it's all legal, they know you're a carer.
Yes.
Okay, so were you trying to defraud the system?
No. It was a genuine mistake because I was, at the time, my husband, who has sadly now passed away, he became unwell because he was a kidney transplant patient. And in our family, it was decided my husband would work and I would care. because we were struggling to navigate a caring system. And then what happened was he became unwell, so I decided to do some extra work as a supply teacher, working ad hocly. I was so busy caring, fighting the system. Sometimes I'd be up all night. I hadn't had any sleep. And it was the last thing on my mind to keep checking.
I mean, just those two sentences. Husband, you know, was a transplant, and I was caring for my son, and I was trying to work teaching. You don't almost, it feels like you need to say any more about how busy and overwhelmed she was.
By the way, thank goodness for social media. We've got a story later on talking about some of the slop you get now on places like X and Facebook. But stories like this would be so harder to find and to bubble to the top of public consciousness without it. Quite extraordinary. This lady is doing everything society could ask of her. She's brought 2 kids into the world. She's caring for one of them. Of course, she cared for both of them as babies. And she's looking after her husband, who worked. And she's a supply teacher, very important job. And she's being punished by the state. Tate went on to describe the all-too-common grind of persecution that followed.
What really enrages me, actually, on your behalf, is not so much, although it's very important, the fact that you were suddenly presented with this virtually unpayable bill, which was through no intent on your, but the tone with which you were dealt with. There's you doing your level best to keep your life going, keep your world turning,
And support 2 other people.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole package. You're exhausted, you're not sleeping at night. And they talked to you as if you were a fraud, didn't they? Their tone was really aggressive.
It was what they said to me when I went to tribunal.
What did they say?
Firstly, the judge said that at least my husband and I were still together, and when you are caring for a young person with disabilities, it is a huge strain on the marriage, and quite often they split up. Second thing she said to me...
So what, they said that as though you were going to be getting funds from your husband and you should be grateful?
Yes, and the second thing they said to me was that, oh, let's hope your son will outgrow his difficulties.
What? That's such...
So there's
ignorance.
a fundamental lack of understanding of any situation.
There is.
Yeah.
And as I said, I didn't choose to be a carer. It's a situation I am now in. I am now on no benefits. So I am not on carer's allowance. I am not on universal credit. If you're on universal credit and carer's allowance, that money's taken off the universal credit. If you're a pensioner, I don't think you can get you can't claim carer's allowance. So you're navigating the system, and I am so terrified now. I am not allowed carer's allowance. I've had 2 letters from the DWP, one saying that it's because I'm not doing 33 hours care, which is rubbish, and the second time because I'm obviously earning, but I'm working for myself. It's the only way I can work. But I'm also caring.
At the same time.
And I am swamped with paperwork.
Yeah.
I am swamped with appointments. We have an adult social care system which is in crisis. We have, obviously, health is in crisis, so getting appointments is tricky. So it is a huge problem, and I just want to talk and share about it and see if we can find a way. I am not just a single carer. There is a whole army of carers out there, all with different stories, all passionate, but all about love. My life is not tragic. My life is full of love. And I care because I love my son. I walk in his shadow. And I walked in my husband's shadow, and I would do anything to help them.
The Independent Review, authored by Liz Sayce and published today, makes this comment on those kinds of carer experiences. Carers described how the language used made them feel degraded, like a criminal or cheat trying to game the system. They felt judged and worried that an allegation of wrongdoing could affect future employment or insurance, or in some cases affect fostered children or adoption arrangements. This shame is experienced as the polar opposite of the recognition CA, Carers Allowance, aims to offer to unpaid carers who are regularly described by the government as, quote, unsung heroes. Sayce also criticised the complexity as well as the unlawfulness of parts of the system introduced by the Tories in 2020 and involving carers declaring their additional earnings from part-time work. As one carer told her, it's like playing a game where only the other side knows the rules. In response to the report, the DWP has said it will reassess hundreds of thousands of cases drawn into the department's punitive and sometimes inhuman sanctions system. Of course, none of that will compensate them for the hours of anguish, let alone the value of their labour caused by the system. Helena, like so many things, this awful, barbaric way of doing business, of trying to at least make life manageable for carers, 2020. We see this repeatedly. So many almost inexplicable, stupid, counterproductive, dysfunctional, self-defeating policies can be traced back to at the start of this decade and the Tory government of Boris Johnson. That's not to say that other bad things haven't happened under other people's watch, but it's striking, isn't it?
I mean, it is striking. I mean, it seems like the end point of what seems to be every single discussion that we have in this country about the welfare state and how every single policy is specifically designed to cater to the section of the public who will go off the rails at the idea of somebody getting something that they perceive them not to deserve. I can't believe this person is getting this carer's allowance despite how much that they are earning elsewhere, right? Like you have this obsession we have with means testing more broadly, because that's what this is, right? In the you lose access to welfare if you go over this very slight cliff edge in terms of earning the get elsewhere. That's a kind of means test. And this is specifically a policy that we always have to satiate the political desire of people to ensure that there is no potential quote unquote fraud in the welfare system. And so we end up with this incredibly punitive system where we administer all of these means tests. And it doesn't actually lead to a reduction in people not getting what they deserve, because fundamentally, if you're doing all of this unpaid care work, you deserve it regardless. And all it actually leads to is people who genuinely need it falling afoul of that cliff edge, whether knowingly or unknowingly, and losing a huge amount of state support that they need to be able to ensure that their life is kept on track, that their family is kept in the conditions that anyone would want to be left in. And it leaves them totally holding the bag when it comes to having to pay back the government's huge amounts of money that they don't have, mostly because they're spending most of their time caring. We should be getting rid of basically most of our means tests, as far as I'm concerned, because this is where it always leads to. We talked about the winter fuel allowance earlier on in the year when it happened, late 2024. And the biggest problem with the taking away or the means testing of the winter fuel allowance is what happens to those people who fall just above the level of applying for pension credit, who are arguably going to be worse off than people who are getting both pension credit and the winter fuel allowance. Obviously, they change that by taxing that back more from higher pension recipients. And that's a much better way of doing things where we don't have this real cliff edge. Another thing that this shows is that, of course, you pointed out quite rightly, this is going to be a real problem when we have an aging society, when there are a lot of elderly people who do need caring for, and we just don't have the infrastructure to be able to deal with this. People want to reduce the number of people coming here to work in the care sector already, which is going to lead to this explosion in the necessity of unpaid carers coming from the existing population. But on top of this, it does mean that there's going to be less scope for people to actually go out and work, which we're now disincentivizing them from doing so. If we had, for example, a national care service, a policy that was passed in the National Policy Forum for the Labour Party before they got into government, which they now seem to have totally ditched in terms of pushing this back however many years for a whole ass review to happen of the care sector so they can get the consultants and the Lord's approval for some kind of cross-party solution for the care service. And then now we're going to be, many, many years down the line before this problem that keeps getting the can kicked down the road by New Labour, by Theresa May, and now by this government as well, where we really do need to see a real solution that is both equitable in terms of how much the state can afford to spend on these kind of things without us getting in some kind of inflationary spiral. And fair enough so that people who do unpaid care work are fairly remunerated for the very difficult and very taxing labour that they do without worrying about being penalised for doing what extra they can do on the side to be able to keep their family solvent. It's a really, really tough system, and it is not helped by a broader culture of people who believe in this mythical cohort of those who receive welfare who don't deserve it, rather than if we just made sure that everybody who needs it gets it, and we tax it back more from those who have the means who don't need it, in a sliding scale so there's no cliff edge, we'll continue seeing story after story after story of people who do need help having it taken away for no reason, and it only leading to negative utility in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I would be willing to pay more tax in my own rational self-interest. A carer's allowance, I mean, it's quite an important thing to get right. It's highly likely, we now live in a world where in this country, dementia is the leading cause of death because people are living longer and longer. Not everybody. Median life expectancy is kind of staying the same, but a large chunk of society is living into their 90s and even past 100. It's rational to resource this stuff properly. We're going to go to another story in a moment, but I also just add, there is such a strong argument to break up so many government departments. DWP, I frame this as a welfare issue. It's not a welfare issue. These people are working. It's a caring issue. It's a healthcare issue, but it's administered by the DWP, which I think, by the way, should be broken up. I think the Home Office should be broken up. Isn't it crazy that we have asylum issues, the issue of economic migration and the needs of our economy, and law and order all under one person? Isn't that crazy? Or the Treasury. If you look at a map of SW1, the Treasury is enormous. Number 10 is tiny. We give so much power to the Chancellor. The budget, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the biggest finance set piece of any advanced economy. No other country does economic policy, economic announcements like this. Nobody else. So much needs to change. It's so dysfunctional. It's going to require somebody really brave and thoughtful and principled and who actually has an idea about how to change things, which we've not meaningfully seen in this country for a very long time. The budget is tomorrow. It's the second time Rachel Reeves is centre stage for Britain's showpiece financial statement. The big news, we think, is that the two-child benefit cap will be scrapped. The cap itself is a relatively recent measure, first introduced by the Conservatives in 2017. Its intention was to reduce welfare spending. It stops parents from claiming child tax credit or universal credit after more than 2 children. Scrapping the cap is predicted to cost around £3 billion, and the IFS forecasts that abolishing the measure could remove hundreds of thousands of kids from poverty. It was less than 2 years ago, of course, that 7 Labour MPs lost the whip for advancing precisely this position. Back then, you might remember, they voted for an amendment to the King's speech to scrap the cap. Fast forward to today, and that position is set to become government policy. In a minute, I'll be asking Helena why she thinks Labour are doing this, but before I do, I want to look at a few other mooted tax hikes. One is a proposed mansion tax of sorts, with the government set to introduce a new tax for around 100,000 highly valuable properties across the UK. The threshold for that is expected to start at around £2 million. This would be built upon revaluing properties in the top 3 council tax bands, and the measure could raise as much as £400 million. The collection mechanism for this new tax is straightforward, very hard to evade. It's council tax. While critics have sought to paint the measure as an attack on the successful and driven by the politics of envy, the truth is that council tax is based on property values in 1991. That means that ultra-valuable property, especially in bigger cities and especially in London, pays far less than you'd expect. The changes aren't expected to apply until 2028, which of course gives plenty of time to those potentially buying and selling properties. So no moaning, please. In short, this is a fair, sensible and progressive policy. Well done, Rachel Reeves. You won't hear me say that very often. Money is also set to be raised from changes to inheritance tax rules, a new tax on pensions salary sacrifice schemes, and changes to VAT on taxi rides. The big money raiser is, however, the fact that tax thresholds will stay where they are until 2030. That will likely raise between £7 and £8 billion for the Exchequer. Also in the crosshairs are cuts, including what I like to call the Pinarello subsidy. A bike to work is a fantastic salary sacrifice scheme that allows employees to get bikes tax-free and pay back the money owed over a year or more. So far, so good. Only in 2019, the Tories got rid of the cap of £1,000, which is all the more intriguing because it's particularly advantageous as a benefit for the better off. The programme saves 42% of the cost of a bike for higher rate taxpayers and 30% for basic rate taxpayers. And the removal of the cap has meant thousands of people are buying bikes and e-bikes for £4,000 or £5,000, with the taxpayer paying for almost half of it. The FT reports this: Cycle to Work should be about helping ordinary commuters switch to greener travel, not giving tax breaks to high earners buying £4,000 e-bikes for weekend rides in the Surrey Hills, said one government figure. Taxpayers shouldn't be footing the bill for luxury leisure. I like bikes. They're going to be central in a world after cars. I don't like cars. But this is a really striking change in policy. It's meant a doubling of the budget for Bike to Work. And as I say, that's a subsidy that overwhelmingly goes to wealthier people that live in bigger cities. Helena, I don't want to talk too much about that, but for me, it was just such an interesting contrast to what we saw with the carers allowance, right? You know, people are going to make arguments for, well, you know, I want my tax-free £5,000 Pinarello bike. Sorry. There are people out there that are being asked to pay back thousands of pounds while they work full-time, while they're caring for a husband with Parkinson's disease. You are not that high a priority on the list. My apologies. But anyway, this show is only 1 hour, so I won't badge you on that one. What do you make of the budget more broadly?
I mean, it's surprisingly more progressive than we would have expected. And what's interesting as well is that's not just in the details. For example, when they did the budget last year, whilst it was good that they raised some taxes, like it was good that they increased capital gains tax slightly at the last budget. And I think that whilst it wasn't the best tax to raise, increasing national insurance for employers at least made sure that there wasn't real terms cuts in unprotected departments, as was predicted by the IFS before the election. As Stephen Flynn pointed out loads and loads of times in the run-up to the election, that if they didn't raise taxes, those cuts were happening. So it was a real sleight of hand that they did in 2024 to justify tax rises, not by saying it would be good if these government departments didn't have cuts, and instead said, oh, there's this black hole, we've got to raise taxes, oh no, right? That was the level of subterfuge the Labour Party were engaging in last year to appeal to these kind of middle-income, Mondeo man-style voters that they wanted to win over in the run-up to the election, and they essentially had to hoodwink into being accepting of tax rises by painting the previous government as overspending far too much. We have to raise taxes to be able to wipe the slate clean and fix the foundations. All that rhetoric in the run-up to this budget, surprisingly absent. I guess because you can't get away with lying more than once. You actually have to be somewhat truthful with the electorate. Now, I think lots of people who voted Labour probably weren't expecting something like this, given what they were saying in the run-up to the election. But the language we're seeing now is people like Keir Starmer saying this is going to be a Labour budget with Labour principles. Rachel Reeves made a very impassioned argument to LBC about why child poverty is not just bad holistically for the children, but bad for the economy and broader society, which was arguments that the left were making when MPs were removed from the Parliamentary Labour Party, had the whip removed for voting for an SNP amendment to do the same thing that Rachel Reeves is making the arguments for now. So that's a big rhetorical change in promising to be redistributive, promising to do things that we're seeing now that impact high property wealth, which is something that we've all been calling for here on the left. Maybe they wanted a bigger extent of how those taxes were being implemented, and a small £600 million change is very, very small fry in the grand scheme of things, but a broader change in council tax I will be happy with. But this language is being changed for one very specific reason. It's losing votes to the Green Party. They're losing votes to Zach Polanski's Green Party, and not a small amount of votes either. The Greens are level with the Labour Party in loads of polls. When you look at the crosstabs of these polls and you look at polls of the Labour membership, they're losing twice as many of their voters to the Greens as they are to Reform, and they're losing as many voters to the Liberal Democrats as they're losing to Reform UK. Now, I'm not saying that the Liberal Democrats are necessarily a progressive party, but their communications have changed. In the run-up to the election, they were very kind of orange book style policies. They were very much kind of marketing themselves at the same kind of voters that Labour were going after in the kind of shires where they were winning over Tory voters. But given that there's now a kind of more Beveridgeite wing of the Lib Dems that are in ascendancy, like Josh Babarinde being more kind of prominent in terms of their communications. They're now going after Labour by saying you should be taxing banks and these financial transactions and big social media giants. Now, again, small fry in the terms of the actual policy itself, and their policy prospectus isn't particularly progressive, but it's that angle that they're coming from that's meaning people are moving away from Labour. But broadly, it's the Greens that they're afraid of and the rise of Zach Polanski. They don't have a choice other than trying to appeal to voters that they're losing, because it's not about trying to stop the hemorrhaging of votes to reform to try and win an election. They're scared of their entire base falling out. People who voted Labour for generation after generation after generation are leaving Labour in their droves, not just in the membership and not just in the Labour movement, but they're refusing to vote Labour and they're voting for the Green Party or other left-wing parties because of Labour's approach to the welfare state, their approach to broader tax and spend, and their broader approach to how they holistically see the economy. The issue, of course, you'll be asking is, will this work? Will this win back those voters? And the answer, of course, is no, it won't. Again, I'm happy to see these changes. I think the overall raising tax and spending that on more welfare is broadly a good thing. Targeted people who live in quote-unquote mansions, all you want, I'm all for it. And I'm glad to see these changes. But I don't think it will win over any of these people that they're losing to vote parties that are ostensibly to the left or realistically to the left in the case of the Green Party, because no one believes Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves when they say these things. People are used to being pandered to in terms of where they think is most electorally viable for them. They did it in the run-up to the election, they did it just after the election, and they're doing it again now. We don't believe that these people broadly have an interest in keeping the welfare state in the position that it's in, given they tried to cut the welfare state earlier this year. Just in the same way that Reform UK voters don't believe that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have all become massive patriots overnight, because Yvette Cooper goes on about the different kinds of bunting with Union Jacks on that she has in her household that no one and their mum believes that she actually does, because it looks like pandering. If they had a vision, if they broadly went to the electorate last year and said, this is where we want to take the country, this is our prospectus for government, this is where we want to see the country at the end of the 5 to 10 years or whatever it is, based upon this set of principles, this ideological framework, people would buy into it. But they didn't do that. They said, I guess we'll grow the economy. And that was it. That was their prospectus for government, was the highest sustained growth in the G7, which isn't a mission. It's not a goal. It's just a part of the policy framework that doesn't have any ideological point to it. How are you going to economy? Who are you going to grow the economy for? I mean, they keep chopping and changing where they think the ideological winds are going. No one is going to believe them. No one will believe them in the slightest. So it won't work. The other thing I would also like to point out is that in the run-up to the election, everyone kept saying, who was on the kind of more liberal side of politics, the soft left, the centrists, the social liberals, they were all saying, we have to vote Labour. You have to show your support for the Labour Party. Otherwise, you'll wind up with a reform government. Now they're in government, we're going to stare down the barrel of Nigel Farage as Prime Minister anyway. And second of all, it's this refusal to vote Labour. It's this withholding of the votes from the Labour Party, whether on principle because you don't feel represented by them, which are lots of the cases of people who are less politically engaged, or people who are very politically engaged, like probably plenty of people in the Novara audience, who don't want to vote Labour because we don't want to be seen to be giving these people our vote when they take it for granted. They give up all of this leverage in terms of what the Labour Party should stand for, in terms of what we expect from a Labour government. And the Labour Party said, well, if you're going to give us your vote forever, we don't need to pander to it. You have nowhere else to go, quote unquote. Now they're in power, they're doing things, or they did things up to now, which were against the interests of that base. People have gone, oh, well, there's a Green Party over here. There is somewhere else that we can go. We will walk through the open door. Remember what Keir Starmer said? The door is open and you can leave. That was his explicit promise to people in terms of how he'd change the Labour Party and what he wanted to see. They've left in their droves. They've shaken off the fleas. And now they're having to win these people back by offering them policy that isn't just growing the economy, being the adults in the rooms, being the conservative neoliberal consensus, but done more proficiently, done more competently, right? And whilst they're more competent than the Tories, they're engaging in capital spending that the Tories never did, and that's a good thing, unless they actually show people who support the Labour movement as an ideological background, as an ideological principle, and the principle of social democracy or democratic socialism, unless they show people that that's what they believe in, rather than pander to the people who they think have those values, they'll never win over anybody. And no matter how progressive they are in this budget, I think that for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves specifically, that ship has sailed. People have already made their minds up. And all it will do is make people negatively polarized to these policy announcements because they're coming from people that they don't trust. If, for example, in the May elections, it looks like they're going to get destroyed from all sides. In their northern homelands, they're going to get destroyed by Reform UK. In the cities of this country, they're going to get destroyed by the Green Party. And it will be the end of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' tenure in the positions of power as they get swiftly regicided by the Labour membership because of the abysmal failure that they've made in defending their councils, defending their councillors, defending them in the Senate and in Holyrood. There'll have to be a reckoning as to a vision that will be implemented by whichever leader replaces Keir Starmer. And that person can wipe the slate clean. That person can make an ideological volte-face and say, this was the end of the Starmer and Reeves period. I'm sorry we did that to people. I promise we'll make amends. This is my vision for the country. But any chopping and changing that happens now in response to polling from Reeves and Starmer will be totally unbelievable because they were never believable in the first place and they never set out why they were doing it in the first place.
I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. But I mean, my job at Novara is to obviously make sense of what's happening. And I have to say, compare this budget to anything from the Tories over the last 14 years. I'm not going to vote Labour the next election, by the way. And I didn't vote for Labour in the last general election. It is just a completely different kettle of fish. It is so much more competent and marginally more progressive. Marginally. But it's so much more competent. And if you were a centre-right person with vaguely progressive views and you didn't want the country to collapse in the next 20 years, I don't know why you wouldn't vote Labour. That's kind of how I view Labour now, right? A moderately sensible centre-right party. That's not my politics, but there's a market for it. And I would say that what they're doing now, and it is extraordinary that you have a party of government with this huge majority, a bigger majority than Margaret Thatcher ever won. They are now being driven in terms of policies at a budget by a political party with 4 MPs. That is absolutely on the money, Helena, and it's absolutely happening. That is extraordinary. But I do feel like getting rid of the 2-child benefit cap, introducing a mansions tax, this kind of stuff, nodding to this kind of mood music, is the difference between 25% and 15%. I do feel like the Liz Kendall ultra headbanger, Blairism redux, let's do ID cards all over again thing, would genuinely wipe the party out. And I suspect some people are beginning to recognise that. Let's stick with this story for just a minute. Ahead of tomorrow, Labour's polling in London has collapsed, which perhaps explains why that 2-child benefit cap is about to go. New polling by Savanta has Labour on 32% in the capital. That's the lowest on record. Meanwhile, Reform are on 23%. That's ahead of the Tories, who are on 20%. Elsewhere, the Lib Dems are on 11% and the Greens are on 10%. Labour's backing in the capital has plummeted from 43%, which was what they got at the last general election in July 2024. And with local elections in every single borough across the city and next May, the party is very much fighting a rearguard action. Helena, the 2-child benefit cap is particularly salient in larger cities, particularly salient in London, amongst younger families, often people of non-white heritage. That is Labour's bedrock in London, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, precisely the places which, when you look at the projections for, maybe the Greens picking up 50 or 60 seats, that's where those seats are. Just to go back to your point about Zach Polanski being the reason we're now seeing the elimination of the 2-child benefit cap, what other policies do you think the Greens might influence over the next 12 months? And what do you make of that polling? Is the reality for Labour in London actually lower than what Savanta is suggesting?
I mean, things will have to come to a head when it actually gets down to those council elections. There's obviously quite a while until we see these things actually have the electoral test. There is a few months left. The impact of the budget, it remains to be seen. But I think you're right. Things like the 2-child benefit cap or the 2-child cap on universal credit, because it specifically with regards to universal credit, I mean, it will probably increase a lot of living standards for these larger families, which is where basically all of the new levels of child poverty have come from. And that's not my words. Those are the words of Torsten Bell, who's now a junior Treasury Minister, who was somebody who was defending the two-child benefit cap when they were getting whipped away from MPs, and against it before the election, before he was selected as an MP through a very, very definitely 100% democratic CLP process that get him put in the seat in the first place, you know? So there is a total justification electorally for them wanting to win over these kind of families in London. When it comes to other policies, maybe they might lose over kind of the more affluent people of those kind of constituencies that have more progressive social views, because you tend to do if you live in these kind of multicultural, more metropolitan areas, right? There's a big kind of distinction politically between urban and rural areas in this country. And they'll be put off by some of the economic policies that might affect them. If you live in a big London townhouse, seeing your council tax go up might also negatively polarize you, because it doesn't matter whether your overall income is higher or not. Those prices have been an asset value that's increased over the last 30 years. I think it's fair to do that. They might not see it the same way. And with Labour retreating on some social issues, that might be something that wins them over to the Liberal Democrats, a party like that are more centre-right on the economy and that are socially progressive in the way that the Labour Party just aren't. There's also the issue of Gaza, insofar as you look at these urban communities, and one thing that has been a real sticking point for the multicultural communities in this country, where there is a very large Muslim population, a very large kind of internationalist ideological base point for these people who live in these societies, who don't subscribe to American unipolar international hegemony, because they're people who take note of international politics. Doesn't matter how many two-child benefit caps you get rid of. It doesn't matter how much more generous you make the welfare state. They've seen a government enable genocide. They have seen Keir Starmer say that Israel has the right to cut off food and fuel and water from starving civilians, right? They have seen the increase in arms sales to higher than they've ever been in decades under this Labour government, despite them saying that they were going to remove some arms licenses. And no amount of tinkering with economic policy will bring these people back now that that red line has been crossed, now that that Rubicon has been crossed for the Labour Party. And it's one of my red lines. I mean, you said yourself you're not voting for Labour at the next election, even though both of us agree that the measures being taken in this budget are sensible measures, right? The things that any Conservative party on the continent would do, because they live in a more normal political system where people accept that sometimes taxes do just have to go up if you have an aging population and an expensive pension contributions bill. They expect those things to happen. Centre-right parties would do this on the continent in the way the Conservatives haven't done in this country, not to the same extent, right? But it doesn't matter how competent that budget is. If you've seen the government, as we all have, and like one of the red lines that we all have, enable a genocide, you can't see these small changes, because they're good changes, but they're small changes, win that vote back. I think that ship has long sailed. And I think it would need a new leader with a new approach to the UK-Israel relationship to win these voters back.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think change the leader, different policy on Gaza, and, even if you kept, broadly speaking, on a similar trajectory, pursuing these marginally better policies than the Tories, I might be persuaded to vote for you. I mean, it's a long way to go, but frankly, there is literally no chance. Keir Starmer could hold my book aloft and saying, I'm planning to implement fully automated luxury communism. Well, firstly, I wouldn't believe him, but secondly, no. Like you say, I think too much of that is now priced in with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Wealthier people are becoming less interested in helping to solve the world's problems. And that's the finding of a new survey shared exclusively with Novara Media. New polling by Ipsos for think tank Global Nation, which studies international cooperation, surveyed more than 22,000 people across 31 countries to assess public global solidarity across three measures. They were whether people identify as citizens of the world, whether they're willing to contribute taxes to tackle global problems, and whether they believe international institutions should be empowered to enforce solutions. The 2025 findings show a broad decline across all three measures. But in the UK, data was particularly stark regarding more affluent households, defined as those earning £45,000 a year or more. Only 28% of households surveyed among that group said they agree their taxes should go towards solving global problems. That's a significant drop of 13% from 41% in 2024. Low-income UK households earning £15,000 per year or less polled in the opposite direction and were actually more likely to agree than last year, while those on medium incomes between £15,000 and £45,000 have stayed the same. Earlier today, I spoke to eco-millionaire and political donor Dale Vince to see what he made of this fall in support among the better off when it comes to helping address some of the world's biggest problems.
We've seen a consistent narrative from right-wing politicians, media, and fossil fuel interests that have undermined the consensus on the climate crisis, the source of it, i.e. man-made emissions, the urgency with which we need to act, and even the coherence with which we're acting. You know, we're quite used to hearing people, right-wing commentators, say, well, what about China? What's the point of us doing anything, you know, while China burns coal and that kind of stuff? I think in combination, that's just undermined the belief and the commitment, the belief in and the commitment to global action.
And on COP30, the summit ended with no mention of fossil fuels in the final agreement. What did you think of that conclusion, but also of the summit itself?
You couldn't write it, could you? It's a summit about saving the world from the burning of fossil fuels, and it ends without a mention of fossil fuels and a roadmap phase out and all that kind of stuff. I don't worry about it overly. I think it's always been a battle at COPs to get dates and numbers and fossil fuels mentioned. I think that's fairly normal. I think it's important that we keep having these COPs because we are chipping away. I went to COP3 in 1997 in Kyoto. World agreed its first climate targets. They were very small. Everybody poo-pooed them. I say everybody, but Greenpeace and people like that were like, oh, it's so tiny, it's not enough. Of course, it wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. And every COP, we all feel it's not enough, but it's a step down the road. That's what I mostly think.
Does the general trajectory on climate change and public sentiment towards addressing it, mitigating it, does that shift, as we saw with that first question over the last 12 months, surprise you? Because, of course, cast your mind back to 2020, lockdown, COVID, everybody in politics, left, right, and centre, was saying we can't go back to business as usual ever again, whatever walk of life that it's in. And yet, perhaps unsurprisingly, that's exactly what we've done. Are you surprised?
I don't think I'm surprised because we've seen it coming like a slow motion train crash, really. Rishi Sunak was the first British politician to break the consensus on the climate crisis and the Climate Act that we have here in Britain. And he started to pull the Tories away from that, turn towards more drilling in the North Sea, for example. He lost the election, rightly so, but not just for that, but the previous 14 years of Tory rule. And then Trump came along, of course, at the beginning of this year, and he kind of put this stuff on the global stage, and he made the unthinkable and the unsayable quite normal on the climate and other stuff, unfortunately. So I think we've seen it coming. So I wouldn't say I was surprised. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think it's something we can't get over, quite frankly, because the opportunities of the green economy are immense. And the rate at which China is growing its economy on the back of the green economy is a signal for everybody that this is not about ice caps and polar bears. This is about jobs and the economy, about bringing bills down. This is the new industrial revolution. And I don't think Trump can stop it. I don't think right-wing politicians can stop it. I don't think delay by the fossil fuel lobby can stop it.
That's a really interesting observation. What really struck me this year after May's local elections was the arrival of a new reform Metro mayor in Hull, a former elite boxer, I think a former Olympic boxer. And of course, Reform have a message which is completely antithetical to your own. They minimize the perils of climate change. They are not remotely enthusiastic about transitioning to a green economy. And yet he almost straight away had to say overtly that he wasn't trying to undermine or get rid of jobs in wind, which is a massive employer locally. Do you think the more power Reform get, particularly at a local level, with local authorities, with metro mayors, with councils and so on, and maybe even eventually with MPs at Westminster, do you think the more power they get, actually, the more diluted their message against the green economy will become?
I would phrase it slightly differently. I thought you were going to say, do I think the more power they get, the more contact with reality they get, the reality of governing, then the more their position changes on green stuff. It's a similar thing to what you said. So I agree. Actually, I think it's like a reality check for them. I mean, in Lincolnshire, I think they came in promising hundreds of millions of budget savings through their own version of Musk's Doge, for example. Immediately on contact with reality, those savings evaporated. They weren't there to be had. Nigel Farage has had to row back from his 90 billion tax saving pledge because it's not sustainable. It's not credible. So I think that, and the closer we get to the next election, I think the more we'll see reform coming around to a more normal position. Richard Tice is famously an investor in solar power, by the way. You probably know that. So he's at odds with his own party. Some of the mayors are at odds with their own party. I mean, the party is at odds with itself. But I would say one thing. Today in the news, Richard Tice came out against Drax, and he's not wrong about that. We pay them an awful lot of money to burn Canadian trees, which we claim are net zero carbon when they land on the shore here. That's all kinds of wrong. That's 5% of our power. It's very expensive. Drax have been making fistfuls of money at the public expense. And I think it's a great example of where the green economy and the net zero move goes wrong. To fund Drax, to make enormous profits, to burn trees in the name of net zero, we ought to shut it down. I'm with them on that.
Yeah, it's good to hear some consensus on at least one issue. I want to talk quickly about the budget tomorrow. Of course, a massive set piece. Rachel Reeves second as Chancellor. It's looking like we'll get something resembling a mansion tax on approximately 100,000 properties. The two-child benefit cap could be scrapped. There's going to be reforms to inheritance tax. Is this a surprisingly progressive budget?
Well, from what you've said, if we get those things, definitely, I hope we'll get more. I hope we'll get something of a wealth tax. I think we'll get capital gains tax nudging up again, maybe by another 5%. I think that's important. It went up 5% of the last budget. And currently it sits around about half the rate of income tax. And I think that's wrong. That's an injustice in our tax system. If you make money with investments because you have money, you'll pay half the rate of tax as if you make money with a job. Because you don't have money, you just have a job. That can't be right. So all steps that we can take to address that, I think, are really important. I think VAT may come off energy bills. That's been indicated. If it does, it should go on flying. Energy bills are essentials. Many people struggle to pay them. They choose between heating and eating. Flying is mostly about holidays. That's a luxury. It has no VAT at all. So rather than the Treasury take the hit for taking VAT off of energy bills, I say slap it on flying instead. Stuff like that would make our tax system more progressive. I think we need to do that.
You've been a big fan of a wealth tax, and of course that's had voices across the planet increasingly. Very high profile French economist is talking about them. I believe there's a referendum forthcoming in Switzerland about a wealth tax. Of course, Zoran Mamdani's talked about similar across the Atlantic. The best modelling in regards to a wealth tax suggests that it could raise in this country, in terms of what you're proposing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, about 20 to 25 billion. Obviously, the UK needs a lot more than that. It's certainly a start. What other taxes would you like to see increase to pay for things like the green economy, house building, but also just getting our local authorities and council services back up to where they were in 2010? We have to be real. We're talking about a lot more than 20, 25 billion. So where would you go for that?
Well, look, it's £24 billion every year. So that'll quickly stack up this side of the next election. We're talking about £100 billion. That'll fund a lot of things. I don't think we need to fund house building so much. I don't think we need to fund the green economy so much either. I think, in fact, we can make savings there. At the moment, we give £7,500 to people that can afford a new heating system costing £15,000. I'm talking about a heat pump subsidy. We give another £3,500 to people that can afford to buy a new car to encourage them to get an electric one. I think both of those things are wrong, and they might add up to about £1 billion a year between them. We should save those things. It makes no sense to be giving middle-class subsidies when 5 million people in our country live in poverty. The 24 billion itself is almost the size of this year's black hole. So it's not insignificant in a single measure to be able to do that. And what we really need to spend money on are things like hospitals, roads, schools, that kind of stuff. And we've got to solve the cost of living crisis for the people in our country.
You recently launched a new media platform called Babelfish. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we launched in London yesterday. We're outside the House of Commons with Steve Bray, the infamous Brexit campaigner with the loud sound system and the top hat. And we published an 8-page newspaper, for want of a better way to describe it, focused on reforming the energy market. We proposed 3 changes that will halve our energy bills. We modelled the impact on that had the Tories done it in 2022, and they gave themselves the power to do one of the key things, which is break the link. And if they'd done that, we would have seen an economy 36 billion pounds bigger by now. We'd have depressed inflation by 1.7% and kept it there over that 5-year period. And we'd have knocked nearly 1% off Bank of England lending rates, knocking onto mortgages and rents and paid bargaining and the general cost of living. What we're trying to expose is the fact that our energy bills aren't just wrongly high. It's having a big detrimental effect on the macro economy. We use some economists to do the modeling for us. And so our launch edition is all about reform of the energy market, ending the big energy ripoff. And we had a bit of fun out on the streets yesterday, giving it away.
Oh, that was Dale Vince speaking to me earlier today. Fascinating guy. He was at the Battle of the Beanfield in the 1980s. If you don't know what that is, Google it. A very unorthodox chap to end up where he has. If you're a user of social media, and especially if you're a user of Elon Musk's X, you've probably noticed a lot of right-wing rubbish clogging up your feed. The grimmest kind of anti-black racism, unashamed Islamophobia, tales of a broken and empty London, and endless posts trying to push white supremacy. A lot of it is obviously scripted, with different accounts reposting the same slop endlessly. And AI is often a feature too. Here's one example, posted by several accounts on Facebook.
Protect our people, we will not be moved. Secure our borders.
Interesting combination there of West Country and Northern Irish. And now that right-wing slop may look cheap, but it's actually a very lucrative business. And the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, along with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and The Times, has now traced some of the accounts publishing it back to a single wealthy influencer based in Sri Lanka. Not Sri Lanka, Delaware, or Sri Lanka in rural Wales. Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka. Geetha Suripura claims to have made $300,000 running Facebook pages that push racist, Islamophobic and anti-migrant posts aimed at British audiences. In an interview, he told TBIJ that he targets old people because, quote, they're the ones who don't like immigrants. And he teaches others how to do the same. This is from that TBIJ report. In total, TBIJ and ISD found 128 Facebook pages and groups targeting UK audiences with a combined following of 1.6 million users linked to Suryapura and his students. Suryapura said he did not encourage his students to spread violence. Quote, we just educate people on Facebook monetization and audience targeting. So after that, students target audience of their own interests, he said. Meta said it removed the pages flagged by TBIJ that violated its policies on inauthentic behaviour. The UK isn't Suryapura's only target, but it's certainly the easiest. The report goes on to say this. In a video reviewed by TBIJ, Suryapura recommends that his students target the UK because audiences are highly engaged with political topics, particularly immigration, which he calls, quote, a strong trigger for engagement. The UK is an important audience, he says. They don't really like people from our countries living there, not just Sri Lankans, but even more so, Indians. Tapping into this market is easy, he claims. There's no need for complex video creation, and often a photo combined with emotionally charged music can be enough to attract attention and boost reach. One post, which used this sample format, received 50,000 views by turning a photo of mostly black men in an overcrowded boat off the coast of Italy into a 15-second video with melancholy background music. The image text reads, quote, share if you want Britain to put its own people before foreigners looking for handouts. The page is run by Suryapura and his students, many of which have generic patriotic names, also post content made with a new generation of AI video tools, which allow users to create videos using written prompts. In one video, Suryapura tells his students that AI-generated videos can help political content go viral up to 10 times faster. So that's Facebook. But it's not just Facebook, because there's Twitter too. This weekend, Elon Musk turned on a new feature that allowed users to see the geographical locations of accounts. Now, to be clear, it's not totally reliable. Our very own Michael Walker's account says he's in Canada right now, which I can guarantee he isn't. But there was a striking correlation between accounts posting as beautiful but racist white women and locations far away from Europe or the US. Like this one. Daria Dankworth, allegedly this woman, posts as an anti-Islam, anti-migration MAGA supporter, purportedly from Indiana. Except it turns out that Daria, whoever runs this account, is in Thailand. Or take self-proclaimed conservative woman Maribel, again, allegedly in the US, or so we're told. But nope, it's Thailand. Again, those were just two of the dozens compiled by OSINT analyst Benjamin Strick and the thousands now compiled across X. But it isn't only fake women spamming you endlessly. There are fake men too. This is the best, my favorite. This was from an account called Ian Miles Chung. He's a prolific, racist rage baiter late last month. I refuse to be governed by a Ugandan named Zohran Kwame Mamdani. Get out of my country. What country, Ian? The UAE? He's a Malaysian who's likely never been to the United States, monetizing his account to get Americans angry about politics in their own country, and it's paid for him to end up in the United Arab Emirates. It's a good living for some, isn't it? Makes you think. Some of the slop posts are just plain funny, however. This one from account Epic Maps, which has over 1 million followers, generated a huge amount of engagement after it posted that the top country for male handsomeness in 2025 is India. Turns out, however, they might be a little bit biased because they're based in, you guessed it, South Asia. But that post still got 20 million views. Helena, this is a very serious point because it's not just X, it's across Meta as well. We now have people, particularly in global South countries, it's not to lambast people in those countries, but the simple reality is an internet connection and a smartphone and AI tools are now very cheap, and they can make you a reasonable amount of money, particularly in those countries, very quickly. This is something we should be concerned about, isn't it?
Oh, 100%, 100%. You know, like it turns out that there is negative utility to just having an open market where people can make money with no regard to the societal consequences, right? This is very, very important. And again, very right, you point out that there's a reason why you don't see these same kind of accounts, you know, farming a living essentially off of rage baiting based in Western countries with strong currencies and strong economies, because the pittance that, in our opinion, in our experience, one would make by monetization on Twitter is not going to change anything, but it can be a significant amount of money to people who live in the global South. And whilst there is probably plenty of justification for wanting at least some amount of transfer of wealth from the global North to the global South via things like monetization schemes on the internet, it's dangerous when it has to come at the expense of social cohesion in countries that are going to be targeted by these accounts. And no, it's not just like far-right influencers talking about migration. You see Zionist accounts that are based in countries that are in no relation to the dichotomy of what's happening in Israel. There was a huge, huge account posing as an Iranian Jew, not based in Iran, not based in Israel, based in somewhere completely different, because they were doing it to farm the AdSense revenue or the Twitter blue revenue that you'd get from being able to continually post about a very divisive subject. And this is not just a problem of monetization too. This is a broader problem of the social media ecosystem, because it's not just those accounts that make money off of high engagement, high drama, high levels of contention online. The platforms make that money too. They make money by keeping you engaged. Like that revenue that those blue tick accounts are getting are a proportion of the ad revenue that Twitter is getting and Facebook is getting, and indeed YouTube, this happens on YouTube as well, that they get from targeting ads at the people engaging with this content, keeping people hooked on social media, whether it's watching the next video or looking at the next tweet or angrily being in a 1,000-long tweet reply thread where you're arguing over something nonsensical. It's yet another point of engagement where it gets you looking at your screen rather than doing something else. And even if it wasn't causing a broader problem of social discohesion, which clearly it is, and not because any people want it to do so, they're seeing it as an easy way to make money. In fact, making money off of right-wingers has been very, very easy. I mean, if you watch the average Tim Pool broadcast, his audience donates to him like he's a mega church pastor. Like, anyone who tries to have a go at the left for trying to grift a living must really not understand the level that our audience don't throw money at us. And it's probably good that you only throw a reasonable amount of money rather than just showering us with money like they do people Tim Pool to keep us honest, Not that you shouldn't sign up. You should sign up to novaramedia.com/support, right? But there's so much money available, whether it's in terms of engagement, whether it's in terms of trying to shill for donations when you come to these large right-wing accounts, and it is warping the discourse around making things as contentious as possible, as extreme as possible. We saw this with the YouTube algorithm and the alt-right pipeline, as was called before, because once you're engaged in that kind of content, the only way that it'll keep you engaged by making it more extreme, by getting it even further, by making you into an even bigger wingnut, essentially. And you see huge AI slop content accounts on YouTube targeted at British news. You can tell they're slop because of the actual AI videos, very, very clearly AI, because of the framing of them, the voice that they use, there's no background noise, etc., etc. And there's just a huge farm of these accounts. They link to each other, they post with each other to share each other's content on YouTube to try and get people angry and engaged. It's not critical thought. It is very uncritical, and it's done to make sure people get as angry as possible to keep them engaged. It's really, really dangerous in terms of the political health of countries if our discussion is being done based on what generates views rather than what makes people think. And we really need to think about more moderation from the state in these platforms. Otherwise, it can only go one way.
Yeah, I mean, it is terrifying, isn't it? Thousands of accounts posing as, Israelis. Huge generalization. Many of them are Indian. And then you have thousands of accounts posing as allegedly people who are supportive of Palestine or maybe even people in Gaza, and they're Pakistani. So you have this kind of, what would be the word? The displaced antagonism between these two countries being transposed onto Israel-Palestine. There are people, I'm sure, that tell me, well, now I'll know because, of course, you have this feature, go home. You're going to have to remigrate. You're being deported. Maybe you'll have a window seat. I mean, the window seat thing, maybe not. That's quite funny. Right? But many of those people saying that stuff will be people who aren't in the UK. It'll be fantasists, it'll be weirdos, but increasingly, and this is the terrifying thing, it'll be people who just want to make $50, $60, $70 a month in poorer countries, which again is quite reasonable. They're not trying to foment political unrest. It's just a really easy, guaranteed way to make money because some of the richest people in the world, like Elon Musk, have created very bad incentives through really stupid things. This is something I talked about at length in a recent conversation with Cory Doctorow. That was last Monday. 700 people came down for an amazing, amazing live event. It's going to go out, I think, the Sunday after this one. But his thesis of enshittification and how big tech is destroying so much, it's so much worse than you think, is really something. And this is just the leading edge of it. But it's something I think we can also be excited about. Cory used the phrase, a post-American internet. If a post-American internet means I don't have people on the four corners of the planet LARPing as Israelis and as Americans and as white nationalists, that can only be a positive thing. Rockstar Games is the developer responsible for the Grand Theft Auto series of video games. And it's a very rich company indeed. GTA 5, released in 2013, has grossed over $8 billion in sales so far, and GTA 6, due to be released next year, is expected to break records of its own. But companies as rich as Rockstar don't usually get there by being fair to their workers. Now, Rockstar has been accused of union busting after firing dozens of developers across Canada and the UK. Why? Because they were sharing internal company messages on an employee and union-only Discord server, with union leaders accusing the company of trying to prevent people from being able to freely communicate. In total, 34 employees have been fired, all members of the union, the Independent Workers' Union of Great Britain, or IWGB, Discord channel. All were reportedly either members of the union or involved in trade union activity. It's not clear what communications in the Discord server prompted those firings. Most conversations appear to involve salaries, bonuses, and other HR issues, topics protected by the Equality Act of 2010 and, of course, relevant to any members of a trade union. But investigative journalism outfit People Make Games, which focuses on the video game industry, managed to obtain some of the messages that they believe prompted those sackings. And they seem to be about changes to the company's Slack policy. The IWGB has now issued legal claims against Rockstar for unfair dismissal, with the union's legal team saying this. We are representing employees who are dismissed by Rockstar Games in circumstances that we believe amount to victimization and collective dismissal linked to trade union activity. Despite our representation and attempts to meet with Rockstar to resolve the matter through negotiation, Rockstar have declined and persisted to terminate members of the union in a manner that is unacceptable and unlawful. Accordingly, we have now issued formal legal claims against Rockstar on behalf of the claimants. In a statement to Bloomberg, Rockstar management said this. Last week, we took action against a small number of individuals who are found to be distributing and discussing confidential information in a public forum, a violation of our company policies. This was in no way related to people's right to join a union or engage in union activities. Earlier today, I was joined by Chris Bratt of People Make Games. I began by asking him about whether this was an example of union busting.
I mean, I asked this question to one of the workers myself when they were demonstrating up in Edinburgh, and they said it's hard to ignore the correlation there. I mean, 34 people have been fired for gross misconduct, and I had been speaking to these people before the firings took place because they were unionizing. These were the exact same people that were in the early stages of forming a union at Rockstar, and I initially thought I was going up there to see them to kind of break the news that this union even existed, a big landmark moment for British Games Union history. And then the next thing I know, almost everyone I'd been in contact with from the organising committee and the wider union there had been fired in one go. We don't know exactly what Rockstar has in terms of evidence to defend this decision, but yeah, from what we've seen so far, I can certainly see why people are using that kind of language.
So just to be clear, we're talking about more than 30 people, and all of them are being hit with this claim of gross misconduct, not misconduct, gross misconduct. All of them.
Yeah, that's right. And there's been very little sort of evidence provided as of yet, but we would later hear a very short statement from Rockstar, which claimed that these employees had been, and I quote, distributing and discussing confidential information in a public forum. And if you know anything about the games industry, and particularly Rockstar Games, the creators of Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, it's an industry that can sometimes be plagued by these massive leaks that happen. They can be quite turbulent for the companies involved. And that language, confidential information on a public forum, to a lot of people, it suggested, oh, well, maybe these people have been leaking important information from the games, screenshots, footage, things they shouldn't have been. And what we have found out from speaking to the union and sources inside Rockstar is that this public forum refers to a Discord server that the union members had been using to organize their activities. Rockstar Games is a worldwide studio, but it has studios across the UK in places like Edinburgh, Dundee, Lincoln. And so this Discord server was somewhere where union members and employees who are interested in the union would come together to discuss working conditions and whether or not a union was a good idea. And the kind of confidential information that we have seen so far that was discussed on this Discord server. Well, first of all, we've seen pay and bonuses being talked about there. The union have defended this as completely normal behavior for people trying to improve their conditions at work. And then what we've been told by sources inside the company, and it lines up with this timeline we now understand of when the firings took place, is that this is going to sound very granular, Aaron, sorry about this. There was a Slack set of servers at Rockstar which people would use to communicate at work, and some policy changes had been announced on this, how Slack would work going forwards. Basically, they're getting rid of all the channels where people could talk about things that wouldn't work, which is, a gesture in of itself. And over on this Discord, the union members were discussing their frustrations about this. Some of these channels were places where they had lightly been trying to organize and get the message out about working conditions. And it seems, from what we've heard from our sources, that this discussion of what was internal emails about a policy decision related to Slack seems to be at least part of, if not the thing that has kicked off an investigation into this Discord server, and has then been pointed to as a potential breach of contract, leading to this gross misconduct set of firings. Now, we don't know what Rockstar has on top of that, but so far, this is the thing that we've seen from the Discord server, which could be pointed to as confidential information. And yeah, if you line up that kind of discussion with the way in which these people were fired, again, this is why the union so far is claiming that this is, I think they describe it as one of the most blatant examples of union busting in the history of the games industry.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. I mean, it's one thing to be critical of your employees and say, I'd rather you do this rather than that. You're entitled to have that opinion. Line managers are entitled to talk about those things to members of staff. But gross misconduct, for people listening and watching, is a very, very serious thing. Generally speaking, means one and out. And to apply it to dozens of people at the same time is highly unusual. You recently went to speak with fired Rockstar workers in Edinburgh. Can you expand on how they're being affected by all of this?
Yeah, well, first of all, that gross misconduct charge, if it sticks, if this isn't something they're able to clear, is potentially going to stay with these people throughout the rest of their careers. It's something that, they've been jettisoned out into a games industry that is not in a healthy state right now. The last few years have seen tens of thousands of layoffs across the world. It's a really dicey moment to be a game developer. So they've been fired out into this industry that is not full of jobs ready to go, and they have gross misconduct attached to them. So employers can ask about that in interviews going forwards. It can come up in reference checks. It could have long-lasting implications. But then the employees themselves, it's also worth knowing that some of them have worked at this place for a decade plus, have really dedicated a huge portion of their careers to this studio. They were about to release. It's actually been delayed now after this decision has been made. It's unclear how much link there is there. But they were about to release one of the biggest games of their entire careers. It will be one of the biggest games the games industry has ever seen, as far as we can tell. Analysts are predicting it could be bringing, I think, $3 billion worth of revenue in its first year. This was a huge moment for them, and they are no longer going to be at the studio when the game that they've spent years working on comes out. And then one other thing I wanted just to note on how it's affected them as individuals. I've spoken to people who are here in the UK on work visas, who've brought family members with them attached to those work visas, pets, and have traveled halfway around the world to work on this game at this studio that they, really care about. And now they are facing the very real possibility of needing to leave the country almost immediately. This is a hugely impactful decision that's been made. And whether or not contracts have been breached here, and whether or not, honestly, this is something that the union is able to successfully defend or not, I think there is a very real discussion that needs to happen about the ethics of doing this to people who work for you. 34 people, 3 of them are based in Canada, but 31 are in the UK. their lives have been completely changed in an instance. Even the way in which they were fired, actually, they were brought into the day it happened, right at the end of October. They had a very short meeting with HR if they were in the office, handed an envelope, which with some brief details as to why the firing had taken place. They were then escorted out of the building by security. They were not allowed to speak to colleagues on the way out. They were not allowed to pick up the belongings from their desks. Like, I don't think you can compare the outcome here, the punishment with the crime, from what we've seen so far. It feels like such an inhumane way to treat these people who work for you, and it's why we felt it's been a really crucial story for us to cover, and for the games industry, and hopefully the wider country to really not get brushed under the carpet.
Is your suspicion that really this is just a pretext to get rid of people that maybe the company was looking to get rid of, that because of developments with regards to AI and some of the job cuts you've talked about happening in the industry globally, this was just quite useful? And I think that really gets back to what you were saying about this being cruel, even if they have done something wrong, and I don't think there's much evidence of that. But even if they have, gross misconduct, people having to leave the country, departing in the manner you just described. Also, you don't have to pay compensation packages. You don't have to go through quite onerous exit plans with some people. You might say, I get it, that's not necessarily convenient for a business, but this is a really, really shoddy way to be carrying on.
Yeah, there's a few things on that, really. I think it can't be understated how important a Rockstar union would be for the British games industry. Right now, we have one certified workplace union in the country. That only happened in October as well. So we are in a very early moment for unionization here, but it's coming. Like the layoffs that have hit the workforce, there's a lot of talk of AI and that leading to job cuts as well, coming down the pipeline. Unionization is such a crucial thing in the industry right now, and Rockstar would have been a tentpole example of that. It's such a huge studio; they make such big, important games. If Rockstar are able to unionize, it would matter. And something that we kind of have certainly considered in our reporting here is that Rockstar may well go through a tribunal and be found to have broken the law, and maybe there's going to be payments that need to happen as part of that. Maybe there are larger settlements even that happen before then. But you do have to wonder whether or not that's a price this studio, this extremely lucrative company, would be willing to pay in order to just crush a union before it can even get going. I mean, the message this is sent to workers that still are in the studio. I mean, the union does exist still. In fact, we've been told that there's been some recruitment that's happened even on the other side of this, but it must have just set the fear of God into these people as to whether or not this is something that they can risk being a part of. One final point, just in terms of the money. Rockstar make these some of the biggest games in the world, right? And there are often launch bonuses that come with that for employees. They're usually, depending on your level of seniority, they're worth tens of thousands of pounds. And presumably, unless these people are able to get reinstated, those launch bonuses don't exist anymore. So I think you could argue there's a financial incentive there as well for this to be handled in the way it has been. But yeah, just overall, just such a cruel. Rockstar does not have the best history in the world for treating its workers well. It's part of the reason why there's a union that's been born here. But just what a stain on its history.
Well, that was Chris Bratt from People Make Games speaking to me earlier today. That's tonight all done. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another great show live from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.